Welcome everyone, and thanks for hanging out a bit. I just had the pleasure of talking with Nathan Coleman for an hour about, you guessed it, honeybees. His Tennessee weather is very different than Alaska, but the information and strategies apply to our colonies as well. Relax and enjoy.
Buzz.
All right, welcome everybody. This is a special edition of the Midnight Sun Bee Club video conference that's not occurring during a Midnight Sun Bee Club meeting. We have a guest. It's Nathan Coleman from Duck River Honey. He is in Tennessee. He has a lot of great videos out there on YouTube. I would encourage you to find him, subscribe to him, and watch and learn. We are going to talk about a number of topics today, and I've got a couple of members of the board to help me out with the questions. And if you are watching this and you have questions about what you're seeing, then please put them in the comments and we will circle back and try to get answers for them. So Nathan, do you want to do a self-introduction and tell people a little bit about yourself or the channel before we get started?
Oh, goodness. I don't have an elevator speech prepared. I'm born and bred in the Toddy's Bend community of Tennessee. It's a bend of the Duck River. And, this part of the country, the river makes these big sweeping bends, and every bend is named after the first white settler that moved in. So Robert Toddy moved in 1810. His cousin Harrison moved in 1812, and I'm a direct descendant of Harrison Toddy. So my family's been here since 1812, and I grew up with all kinds of farm animals and stuff. Got a couple of agricultural degrees, and left agriculture for a lot of years, and then got back in to beekeeping. And I was 39 years old and got my first bees, and absolutely just fell in love with it. And that makes me very cautious. I've got a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. It makes me very cautious to try to expand their horizons early, because you just never know, what they're going to fall into that they just absolutely fall in love with. So that's sort of how I got into it. And now with job changes, I got laid off in January. I'm trying to scale up to where I can make beekeeping a full-time career. So I've got 40, came out of winter with about 40 colonies. I did 25 splits, introduced queens that I reared on Monday this week. And I'll probably make another 25 splits around the middle of April. And then we'll go into our honey flow, last part of April into May. And then I'm going to try to make it to winter with 120 to 150 colonies, somewhere in that range, and then try to double that next year. So a lot of scaling, a lot of work, not enough hours in the day right now.
All right. Well, we are just coming out of winter.
Yeah.
And by coming out of winter, it means something different here. We still have I have 1.5 feet of snow in my yard. But we are getting temperatures up around 40, 39 to 40. The bees have taken a cleansing flight. It's just a happy experience here when you finally go out and see all the snow stained brown, because if they have that first cleansing flight, they are way more likely to get through. And so one of the things that's on our members' minds is early season management. They have a lot of questions about when to add pollen patties and when to start feeding syrup. I understand the dynamics are different in Tennessee, but maybe you could walk us through what your early season management, what the factors you look for, and the actions you take.
It really is pretty different, because we have pollen 12 months per year. Mistletoe will bloom in December. That's about the only thing, but it is technically a pollen that the bees will forage on. So henbit and dead nettle start in January. So we don't feed a lot of pollen patty. We have so much trouble with small hive beetles that sometimes it creates more problems than it solves. But early season management for me is really real early season management is just tipping hives and make sure that they've got enough weight. And if they don't, I'll feed fondant. I don't like feeding syrup until the temperatures are warm and stable.
What's that mean to you? Your worm is going to be different than ours.
To feed even heavy syrup, it needs to be, for me, it needs to be highs in the 60s. I really like to see highs in the 60s for a week or week and a half in the forecast before I'll feed even 1.5 to 1 or 2 to 1 syrup. I really like the Hive Alive fondant patties. Hive Alive stuff, that there's science behind it. It's got seaweed extract and all these goodies in it. I could question whether that is really as beneficial as they say it is. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but that guy has got a super smart package put together. It's just a square 1 kilo fondant patty that will fit on my inner cover. I put the telescopic top lid back on and walk away. It's a clear plastic packaging so you can see if the bees are eating it or not. And it's just super smart. So I like using those early in the season for emergency feeding if I've got light hives. And that is the time of year here when hives starve. It's typically February or March because they're starting to brood up and get into the spring turnover. And brood production takes a lot more resources than just keeping the winter bees alive does. So if you've got cold temperatures and they're clustered, they don't eat much. But when they start brooding up, that's when they'll fall on their faces and starve.
So a couple of follow-ups on that. So I've seen from your videos that you're using wood hives, and the dynamics are pretty different. We're pretty much exclusively using insulated hives, polystyrene, different models, and so. But we have exactly the same dynamic. I mean, the average age in your colonies of your winter bees is probably, I'm going to guess, somewhere around 100 days when they're coming out of those winter bees. And for us right now, our bees are all well over 200 days old.
Yeah.
They haven't flown since October, but the dynamic is the same. And this is a really stressful time for them. So when you are feeding them the fondant, are they brooding up on the fondant, or does that take syrup in your experience?
So that's one reason I like feeding fondant over syrup early, because it really doesn't stimulate them that much. It's a subsistence food. They will feed brood that they would want to feed anyway, but I see that they treat it more like honey than sugar syrup. Sugar syrup makes them want to raise brood.
And you want to delay that until you feel like the buildup can be supported by resources?
Well, Tim, it's all about what you want to do. Like, I don't want to rear queens and make splits until I've got a good drone population. So I don't want to feed sugar syrup when I'm just starting to see drones get put into the hives. I want to feed sugar syrup when I've got mature drones available and I can get into queen rearing. So if I had a queen supplier in Florida who was shipping me queens early in March or mid-March, then I wouldn't be so against feeding syrup early in the season, because I could get those bees kick-started, get populations up, and have enough brood available that I could make splits. But I don't have those early queen sources. I'd rather do it myself. So just letting them progress naturally into spring until I've got drones available is just a strategy that I chose.
So see if I got this right with a quick summary. They will brood up on fondant, but they won't explode in their spring buildup on fondant.
I think they treat fondant more like honey frames. So they'll brood up more naturally. It's not stimulative.
I see. And, that's something that we haven't talked a lot about as a club because, we're subjected to, that's the wrong word. All our beekeepers watch a lot of YouTube videos on beekeeping that were made in places like, Tennessee and Texas and Alabama, and they're great, but our dynamics are very different. And and a lot of them are commercial beekeepers. So their whole goal is to to get these gigantic population colonies and then maximize their honey production. Most of us are backyard beekeepers, and if you get a hive, too big, too fast, then it just makes all your other management decisions more difficult because they're going to want to swarm, and especially for new beekeepers, when you pop that top and look at this writhing mass of insects and you think you're going to find the queen, or it's just very intimidating. So anyway, one of the things you're saying, I think I really appreciate is they'll do fine on fondant. And a follow-up question, you kind of touched on it, the additives, and there's so many additives available right now. And I think I heard you say you don't have the trial experience. You didn't try some and not try some and see what it did, but the pitch sounds good to you.
Well, it does, and it's inverted sugar. It is true fondant, not just a sugar cake. So the bees take it easier. The packaging is really smart. It's easy to apply. The cost is not that bad. So I like using that. I do think fondant is better than a sugar cake because it's already inverted. It's easier for the bees to take. And I'm not a chef, so I don't really want to cook fondant myself. So
you want to keep the number of explosions in your kitchen to a minimum?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I understand. Okay. All right. So how big are you trying to grow your colonies, and how do you get them there?
Well, right now, I recently went through. Well, Tim, let's go into the next phase of spring first, and then I'll talk about this.
Yep.
So you were talking about spring priorities. Early spring, I want to make sure nobody starves. They've got the resources that they need. I will equalize honey frames into hives as well. If you don't want to feed fondant, you can take hives that are really heavy and steal honey frames from them and give to hives that are too light. So I will do that as well. And then as they start to brood up, my goal changes to getting the brood nest in the bottom box and getting open comb, drawn empty combs on top of the brood nest, because queens have three directions that they can go, and they have a strong preference for moving up. They move up very easily. They will move out begrudgingly, and they don't want to move down. So that's just how the dynamic works. So if you get the brood nest on the bottom, empty combs on top in the second box, the queen will move up, and then she will begin to move out. And then once that happens later in the spring, I'll start to again push that brood nest back down into the bottom box and keep empty comb on top of her. That is just a swarm prevention method. It also allows me to count brood frames and see if they have an appropriate amount of brood frames for a certain time of year. Right now, I'm 3 to 4 weeks before my nectar flow. So I went through my hives and left 10 frames of sealed brood in the bottom box, empty combs on top, and anything they had in excess of that, I pulled off into splits. I had some hives I just got 1 or 2 from. I had some hives I got 8 or 9 frames of sealed brood from. They had almost 20 frames of sealed brood. So those hives were going to swarm before the nectar flow hit.
So let's put this in perspective, because you use only medium boxes, right? And so I'm guessing you are getting those 10 frames of capped brood out of 2 boxes or 3 when you're going
4.
through? Four. You
I've
have
got,
them
yeah,
four high.
I've got 4 high on most of my boxes now, because adding drawn comb is also a swarm prevention technique. So I'd winter in 3 mediums, and then coming out of winter, as the populations grow, to alleviate congestion, I'll add a box of drawn comb on top. And almost all my hives are in 4 mediums right now, and they will have brood in at least 3 of those. Some of them have got brood in all 4 boxes, but again, queens move up easier than out. So it's just this little chimney of brood right in the center, and it goes from the bottom all the way to the top. So I'll go through and pull all that brood down into the bottom box and cycle empty combs back on top of that. So the queen will move up into that and just keep her expanding, keep her having ample room to lay. And then try to alleviate congestion, and then pull excess brood frames to make splits with, and also relieve that swarm impulse.
So this early in the season, you got, which is a month before your honey flow, you have 4 boxes full of bees, but you still have a lot of frames that are not utilized.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So
like when I did my box reversals in February, I had brood in the bottom box. I had resources in the bottom box. The bees have moved up now, so most of my bottom boxes are empty. They've got empty comb and some pollen in there, maybe a little bit of brood. So I'm pushing that brood nest back down to the bottom box and letting the queen move up again, because that's what she likes to do.
And you're still don't have a queen excluder. You're just doing frame rearrangement, or do you?
Yeah,
I should say, do you use queen excluders?
I will, but probably not till June.
Is that when the flow starts?
No, my flow starts late April to early May. But my strategy on this is allow the queen as much space as she wants. And I have had very few queens that want more than 4 mediums. Some of them will go into 5, but if you keep pushing the brood nest down and giving her empty space above, they never want more than 4. So what I'll do is we'll get into the flow. I consider the 4th that's on there now to be a honey super, but I let the bees use it for whatever they want. Get into the honey flow, get through May and into June, and I will do my first honey extraction in June. And at that time, I'll probably use fume boards to push the bees down the stack and get them out of that 4th box. If there's brood in that 4th box, they don't want to leave it. So I'll have to pull the brood frames out and shake the bees down. But I want to make sure that the queen is below the 4th box. And then I'll put the queen excluder on above the 3rd. And I'll have probably a little spot of brood in the 4th, put the 4th back on, and then, pull anything above that if it's ready to pull, and then wait a month and do my second honey extraction in July. And all of that brood would have had time to emerge. It's gone, and the bees will backfill those brood cells with nectar. So when I pull that 4th off, I'm already in my summer configuration, which is 3 mediums, and I haven't had to sort brood in the honey house. So it just makes it easier at that point. And that's sort of why I do that. It's just an easy way to do it. I can accomplish a lot of things with less trips to the hive.
Sure. I've got a question about that early spring consolidation and early spring splits. When you're looking at your wintered over 4 medium boxes and moving brood frame down into the bottom box, you fill that with 10 frames of brood. Put another box on top of it, fill it with 10 frames of brood if you have it.
No, I leave them with, I'm counting frames of brood right now. So 3 to 4 weeks away from the nectar flow, I want to have 6 deep frames, 6 to 7 deep frames, which equates to about 9 or 10 medium frames. Okay. And that's all I want them to have. If they've got more than that, they're probably going to swarm before the nectar flow hits.
And so that's when you make the split. The question I've got is, you've got an empty box over here and you're putting those excess brood frames in. Are you shaking the nurse bees off, or and taking just the brood, or are you moving the bees over with them?
I did a video on setting up splits that posted this past weekend. So that goes into more detail. But basically what I'll do is I'll shake all of the bees off of these frames I'm going to harvest, the brood frames I'm going to pull, and put them in an empty box. And then I'll put an excluder on the top of the hive and put that box back on the hive so that bees will come up and populate it. And then I can just go and pull it out, and I know the queen's not in there.
Right.
I don't have to look. I don't have to look for the queen. Don't have to worry about missing a queen.
That was the piece I needed. Thank you.
Yeah, and Nathan Bromley, that's how I was talking to you about doing the hive, the club hives were for trying to. So for Nathan Coleman, most people here get bees, and basically everybody here gets bees and raises them and manages them for honey. And Nathan Bromley and I are going to do a project this summer where we get some colonies and we just try to manage them for bees, and just try to make as much increase as we can. The idea being trying to come out of winter with some overwintered survivor stock that we can then make available to the club members, and we're stuck in there's no new producers in Alaska. Season's too short to make it economically viable. We're dependent on the package industry. And for us, that means California bees that come back from almonds, and they are not, at least our producers aren't doing any kind of selection for, overwintering hardiness in our conditions, or, kind of mite tolerance, any of those things. And so, if we can, even just having survivor stock, because there's such a wide variety of bees that come in, and some of them just don't have what it takes to get through our winter. They got to go 5+ months with no cleansing flights. And if they have a lot of Italian in them, that's not going to happen usually. So you don't have people routinely making splits here in that way. Sometimes they wait till just before swarm season and they'll do splits as swarm prevention. So when you talked about the number of brood frames in that bottom box, you're pushing them down. Before you said capped brood or sealed brood. And so that's what you're putting in that bottom box, right? All the capped brood, or is it all the brood period?
As much as I can find. I will leave the mother hive with uncapped brood as well, because it takes quite a few resources from the hive and energy from the hive to get that finished out. And I really want capped, aged brood to go into splits. New brood is sort of a tan color. The cappings is a tan color, and then it gets a dark, leathery look as it gets older and is about to emerge. So I want that old stuff to put into splits, because that's going to populate those splits.
We all get darker and more leatherier as we get older. So that's an easy one to remember. So one of the things I want to get at though is like if you're looking a month before your flow, how much brood do you want to leave in that colony? Or in other words, how do you define what your extra is that you're going to take out and make splits with?
Bob Benny talks about the art of beekeeping a lot.
Right.
And I think this is the art of beekeeping. He also talks about his mentor, Delmer Smith, back in Oregon. He always said that 4 frames of bees would peak in population in 8 weeks. And Bob has got this calendar running in his head all the time. He'll look at the trees and say, okay, we're 3.5 weeks away from the flow. And he's been doing it for 40 years. So he knows that. And he knows exactly how many frames of brood he wants to leave in a hive. And it's a judgment call. You can look at the population that they've got. You can look at the pollen and the nectar that's coming in. You can look at how much brood they've got in there. You can also look at how many queen cups they've got and whether there are eggs in those cups. If you have seen swarm cells in any of your other hives already. And if you are seeing those things, you can pull them back a little harder. especially if you have got some time to go until the nectar flow hits. They're going to recover and try to swarm again before the nectar flow hits. So it's just a judgment call thing. And, I'll go through hives again this week after I pulled splits last week and just get, scout them out and try to see, okay, did this work? Are they doing what I want them to, or are they still looking a little swarmy? Do I need to do something else to try to slow them down?
I got a question from Nathan Bromley, which is, if you have a hive do you ever have colonies that come out of winter weaker than you expected? And is there any different management you use? Do you just condense them, or?
I pick on them usually.
And that means?
I split them up.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, if I've got colonies that are not going to make honey, if they're not on pace to make honey, then they are non-productive units at that point, and you have to look at them like that. So it's like real estate always goes to its highest and best use. Well, hives should do that as well. So if a hive is big enough to make a honey crop, I'm going to put it into honey production. If a hive is not big enough to make a honey crop, I'm going to split it up and make nukes out of it.
So if we have, so in our situation, a colony that's weak might come out of winter with, say, a couple of deep frames of bees. And if they made it that long, there's certain good things about them, but for whatever reason, they didn't produce enough winter bees to come out stronger. But they did produce bees that could survive our winter in a relatively small cluster. So it's kind of a mixed bag there, right? And so we do have some beekeepers that have those dilemmas, like I have 2 frames of bees, and I'm guessing at a larger level that if you don't have a long enough winter to come out of winter with a hive that small, there's something else happened that's making them crash.
Yeah, it's usually a weak queen, or they had a high mite load or something. There's something wrong with that hive at that point. Now, in your situation, if it's a hive that you want to save the genetics and you want to boost that hive up, then there are several things you could do with your weather. The first thing I would probably do is to put them on top of a double screen board and get them on top of a strong colony so that they've got a heater underneath them. You can boost them with a frame of emerging brood. I wouldn't give them anything that they have to work on, but you can boost them with a frame of emerging brood. When the temperatures stabilize a little bit, you can swap positions with a strong hive on a good flight day. You go in about 3 o'clock and most of the bees are out of the hive foraging. And if you swap hive positions, don't do it with hives that are next to each other. Do it with hives that are 5 or 6 positions apart. And the foragers from the strong hive will populate that small hive, and then the strong hive will lose most of their foragers. And that can boost those small hives up and make them hives have got to have a certain amount of bees just to provide enough heat that they can raise brood, and you can see the potential of the queen. Queens can be very limited just by a low population, and they have a hard time getting over that critical mass.
So the idea is that if we don't think there's some problem with the colony, like disease or infestation or inferior genetics, then if they're worth investing, then those are the ways you would invest in trying to salvage them, give them some emerging brood.
And feed, of course.
And feed, yeah. So actually, Nathan Bromley, I think that would be worth an experiment to try to find some of these smaller colonies and set them aside and see if we can't.
The double screen board will help them a lot. Get them on top of a strong colony.
And the other thing that'll help them is really shrinking their space in an insulated box. And so you kind of just talked me into, I have some people that I help out, and they're coming out of winter with about 2 frames of bees in one colony, but there's no dysentery in there, and they're hanging in there. And I think I'm just going to volunteer to put those shrink them to a 2-frame nuke and feed them. And I don't really have for us, it's more difficult this time of year to think about putting them on a double screen board, because you'd lose so much heat from that strong colony. But if we get into June, then that's a different story. I think that would be fine. But I think we need to explore that just a little bit. How about, do you do any assessment for disease and pests in the spring? And
I'll probably look at Varroa counts before I start getting into the honey flow. So here in the next couple of weeks, I'll go out and sample. This is a quick and easy way that I use. I'm set up on screen bottom boards, and I will just give each hive a dose of oxalic acid vaporization, and then look at the mite fall on a sticky board.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't. It's not as accurate as a mite wash if a mite wash is done properly. I'll put that caveat in there, because you can do a mite wash improperly, sample the wrong bees and get wrong information. But when you do an OAV, you cause a mite kill, and you can look at that mite kill and say, there's a lot of mites in this hive, or there are very few mites in this hive. And this time of year, I want to see very few, because once I get honey supers on, I'm not going to do much to those hives until July. So if I see a high population of mites right now, that needs to be addressed immediately before I get honey supers on.
I just, in the last 2 days, I've been watching a video by a guy named Zach Lamas, Lamas. He did a presentation at the Sustainable Beekeeping Michigan Guild. I get all their initials mixed up. But, his research throws mite wash's efficacy into question, because what he found and shows very well in the video is that contrary to what we think, they're not concentrating on nurse bees, they're concentrating on drones. And have you heard this?
Yeah, they prefer. Well, I know that they prefer drone brood. I've not
brood.
Seen them.
Yeah, not brood.
So they prefer drone bees as well.
Adult drones they're feeding on at a much higher number. And he's doing sampling by manually picking up 40 drones in a hive and just looking at them. You flip them up and count the mites. And his research shows, and it's different depending on the time of year, but the infestation level is predictive based on is more accurate than mite wash, because the mite wash is designed to be a random. It assumes that the mites are evenly distributed throughout the population that you're sampling, when in fact it's not true. They're focused on certain bees at certain times, and that's drones. And anyway, I won't try to do it's awesome, and it's kind of mind-breaking to me. It blew my mind in the same way that Etienne Tardif's research on insulated hives completely upended what we think winter bee behavior is. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that out there. I want to flip back and talk about when you do splits in mediums. Are you splitting to a single medium, or are you?
Yeah, I split to a single medium. So medium frames are 2/3 of a deep. So the industry standard is really like a 5-frame deep nuke box and 5-frame deep split. So that equates to about 7.5 medium frames. So I use a double frame feeder and 8 medium frames in a single medium box, and that is my nuke box.
And
it also becomes their bottom hive body. So when they have outgrown that box, I just move the feeder up to the second box and then move it up to the third. and I don't ever have to transfer them from one box to another. Everything is interchangeable. Just makes it super easy.
And what's your frame arrangement when you're doing a split with 8 medium frames?
It depends. This time of year, I'm trying to make them pretty strong. So I'm generally giving them 5 frames, frame of food, 3 or 4 frames of brood with clinging bees, maybe another shake of bees. My weather looks pretty good. So the ones that I made on Monday, I didn't add any extra bees to, because the low temperature that we've got for the next 2 weeks is like 34 degrees. And I actually set them up on double screens. I'd put a bottom split on the ground, put a double screen on top of it, and put another nuke on top. So that does a couple of things. They can share a little bit of heat, but also if I have one queen come back out of those 2, I can just pull the double screen, merge them, and all the bees are oriented to that location. Makes it easier to capture, at least one hive out of those 2 splits.
And you're doing all queen right splits, right? You're dropping in a queen that you purchased that you've made, or?
No, I dropped in queen cells, and I actually got behind schedule. So I had some queens emerge in the incubator. So I did virgin introductions in cages, and I didn't intend to do that. So I don't have any queen candy made at this point in the year. So I've got to go back and direct release those today after I knock down any emergency cells that they've got.
So when you do a split with a cell, then how much capped brood are you adding? Of the 8?
So again, in a 5 frame deep, it's typical to do 3 frames of brood with clinging bees, a frame of food, and maybe an extra shake of bees. So those 3 frames would equate to about 4 to 5,
okay.
somewhere in there. And that would be a strong split. You can do a couple frame or even 1 frame of brood, 2 frames of brood, and a frame of food. So what I'm really looking at is 3 frames of brood, at least 1 good frame of food, maybe another frame of bees with some pollen and some nectar and stuff. It can have some brood on it. And then I'll fill it out with foundations. So give them 3 foundations and then a gallon of syrup.
When you're introducing a virgin, you got any tips for introducing virgin queens to a colony?
Let there be no eggs or larvae of an appropriate age to make an emergency queen.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Give them no choice. And that's one of the benefits of making your splits ahead of time and putting them over that queen excluder. Because if you let it age 5 days over the queen excluder, you don't have to look for emergency cells.
Yeah.
It just makes it really easy. So most of these, I made a few of them up within that time frame, but most of them aged out so that they were hopelessly queenless. They couldn't make an emergency queen if they wanted to. And at that point, they'll accept any hope that you give them.
So your strategy for doing this is to increase acceptance. It's not for, it probably also helps with management though, because you don't have to then go back and check and see if they've built a cell.
Yeah. Rainy days and stuff. I can just let the hive sit there. My splits are on top of the hive. I don't have to worry about them getting chilled or whatever. So I can watch the weather and play that pretty close and let that age out and get them introduced, and they're going to accept cells a whole lot easier. You can pull them off and let them sit overnight so they know they're queenless, and then give them an unprotected cell. But you can also just pull them off and an hour later introduce a cell in a cell protector. JZ Beezy makes these little cell protectors you can put the cell in to keep the bees from chewing them out. And,
how about with a virgin though? Do you just walk them in? You just let them?
No, I do a cage introduction,
like a queen cage or a roller cage.
Yeah, like if you know that they're hopelessly queenless, you can do a candy introduction. Just let them chew through the queen candy.
Yeah, takes them a couple hours.
No, it'll take 2 or 3 days.
You have to take that split off of the other hive so that they're not screened with the old queen?
Yes. Yeah, you would either replace the queen excluder with a double screen board or pull the split off and move it.
Because they're still smelling the queen down below.
Yeah.
So the virgin, I always thought a virgin queen you could introduce directly because they don't have any, they're not putting out pheromones yet, but you still have problems with them killing the virgin queen at times, or?
Yes, they will.
Okay.
I did a video with Corey Stevens, who's he's a VSH queen breeder, and he sells almost exclusively virgin queens. And it is tougher to introduce a virgin queen than it is a mated queen. Oh. And his method is to make sure that they are hopelessly queenless. They have no hope of making an emergency queen. And then they'll accept that virgin because they don't have an option.
Just so you guys know, I've contacted Corey, and he won't ship to Alaska. But I plan on, I may have to just actually go visit him and talk him into it, because you know, we're at a genetic bottleneck here, really, because there are no feral colonies here. There's no way to get survivor stock wild. We're too far north of their natural range, so we're dependent on these California bees. And if we can, you just have to hit the genetic lottery to get VSH traits. So if we could start, you know, if we could have some stock that we started with, and he has had success, and it is heritable for him. So yeah, I would love to find a way to get started. And he's in Missouri, so they do get a semblance of winter. I grew up there, so I remember how long it stays brown. And it doesn't get white like our winters do, but it's still anyway, I would like to do that. So how I want to touch bases on just any advice you have for people that are doing median management. And we've kind of danced around it a little bit here with our other discussions, but what do you have advice for people? Well, let me ask a different question. What got you to using only mediums?
It makes sense. And I am one of these people that I research and research and research on the front end because I hate making mistakes, especially mistakes that have a high consequence. And when you look at getting beekeeping equipment, once you've got drawn comb, you're married to whatever size boxes you've got. It becomes very difficult to change. So that is a high consequence. That difficulty to change later is a very high consequence. So I read and read and read and read and read before I got married to equipment. And there was a BeeSource thread on the BeeSource forum, and they were talking about what equipment would you have if you had it to do over. And there were all these 30 and 40-year commercial beekeepers saying, if I could do it over, I think I would do all mediums.
All mediums, yeah.
And, you know, these are 30 and 40-year-old commercial beekeepers that have had hundreds or thousands of hives. And I'm thinking, okay, this is something I better look at. You know, these guys know a lot more than I do, and they're saying that this would work well. And it just makes a lot of sense. You know, I've got one footprint. If you think about it, compare it to like a double deep with medium supers. If you compare that to all mediums and think about it like it was a retail store, my store and their store would have a similar amount of product, but I would have fewer SKUs.
Yeah.
So I've got medium boxes that I'm using as hive bodies, honey supers, and nuke boxes. I've got double screen boards. I've got one size of queen excluder. I've got one bottom board, one top lid, and one feeder, and that's it. I don't have to worry about having multiple sizes of frames, multiple sizes of foundations. I'm able to buy in bulk bigger quantities of the same things because I have fewer pieces. And so it makes it just really efficient. The only real downsides are sorting brood frames, counting frames. If you have to go through every frame, it takes longer. but I don't do that much. And then finding queens can be more problematic. There are ways around that. Like if I know I need to find a queen, I'll just go in 6 days, 7 days ahead of time and put a queen excluder between every box.
Oh, every box?
Every box. Yeah.
Wow.
Every box that the queen could be in. So if I've got 4 boxes, I'll put 3 queen excluders in. So and then, I go back and look in the top box, pull out a center frame. Are there eggs? No. Go to the next box. Are there eggs? No. Third box down. Are there eggs? Yes, she's in this box. I just found the queen. I know which box she's in. If I need to kill her or something, then, I can go through that one box of 10 frames and find her. But usually you don't need to know where the queen is. You need to know where she is not. Right. Like if I'm making a split, I need to know she is not in this split that I'm taking away from this colony. And there are more ways to be able to know where she's not than by actually finding her. If I shake all the bees off of those frames, I know she's not on those frames. If I want to pull that queen out of that colony and requeen that colony, I can just take that box that I know she's in out and make a nuke with her. So there's a lot of different ways that you can handle that.
Are you marking your queens too?
I'm not yet. I probably will start that this year. So I am not yet a proponent of requeening every hive every year, and that's one of the big reasons you want to mark them.
Mm-hmm.
I would prefer for the bees to handle superseding on their own and selecting for bees that handle supersedure well. I would just rather them help me with that and not have to do that.
Nice.
Could you talk a little bit more about how what your selection qualities are? Because you're raising your own queens, so you're grafting, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so what colonies are you grafting from?
All right. So I'm using a push pin technique. It's either green or red push pins in the back of the box. I've got mites, attitude, behavior, and honey production. Mites, if they have a high mite count ever, they get a red push pin. If they have a low mite count, then they get a green. A lot of hives don't have anything, so I wouldn't breed from them if they don't have a green push pin. Attitude, bees that are too feisty when they shouldn't be, they're going to get a red, and I'm not going to breed from them. And I'm not going to let them into my drone production yard either. Yeah. I've got 3 drone flooding yards around my mating yard, and hives that are too feisty, they go to honey production yards that cannot mate with my virgin queens. Hives that have a high mite count go to honey production yards that cannot mate with my virgin queens. And then behavior, I hate cross comb and heavy bird comb production. If a hive makes a lot of cross comb and bird comb, I just don't like it. Some hives have tons of hive beetles, some have very few, and they'll be next to each other. So, they'll get a red if they've got too many hive beetles. If they make a lot of cross comb or burr comb or just annoying things that are small but add up, then they'll get a red there. Hives that draw out comb really straight and nice, and the hive is easy to work, I'll give them a green. And then honey production, super swarmy bees are going to get a red. And then if they're not swarmy, they're on track with the nectar flow naturally in the spring, I don't have to pull them back hard, then they'll get a green there. And then they'll just get a yellow push pin for every honey super I pull off of them. And that's sort of my grading technique. I think it's pretty quick and dirty, but I think it's going to be very efficient in changing my genetics over to what I want over the next 2 or 3 years, because not only am I promoting the traits that I want, but I'm eliminating traits I don't want by moving those hives out to honey production yards where they can't mate with my virgins. So I'm grafting from my best and I'm breeding my best to my good is what I'm trying to do.
Okay. How about, you know, you're building up to all these boxes with no queen excluder, and you sometimes, and you're actually harvesting honey before you put a queen excluder in. So how do you handle brood frames in honey boxes? I mean, how do you, like, when you go to get that first, well, I'm just sort of saying, when you go to do that first honey pill, are you you're just taking all the boxes off and you're pulling all the honey frames and then putting them back in with the brood frames?
Well, say I've got 7 mediums tall, and above the 4th, that would be 3 honey supers. There's almost certainly not going to be any brood in the 5th, and there won't be any brood in the 6th or 7th unless something wacky has happened.
Because they have they get that bridge of honey that the queen isn't going past.
The queen doesn't want to go past the honey dome. Sometimes they'll supersede. You'll have a virgin that comes back and gets confused and goes to the top and, builds a nest out up there. But that's one of the reasons I like using fume boards early in the season, because with a fume board, bees will leave honey, but they won't leave brood. So if you use a fume board and you tip the box up and there's still bees in there, I say, okay, they've got brood in this box. What's going on? And I'll look at it. If you use a fume board and you tip the box up and there's almost no bees in there, it's a honey, just solid honey. And so I use that. And then just push all the bees down into the 3rd, put the queen excluder on. I know the queen is below the excluder. Come back a month later and I can pull all of it and not have to worry about brood in the honey house.
So in April, though, I thought I heard you say, I could have misheard it, that your first harvest happens, or maybe that's when your flow starts. In June is when you do it. Okay, I see.
Is when I harvest. Yeah, my flow will probably, our black locust is our first major, and it usually starts the last week of April. And then tulip poplar will start about the first week of May. And this year, I think it may be a little early.
Nathan Bromley, did you get your question answered about that?
Oh, yeah. So I was, what happened? I was just curious. So when I let my queens go up into the mediums, I do mostly deeps and mediums, although I'm trying to convert slowly to all mediums. But I've got mediums that have had brood in them, and I really don't like trying to uncap those. They're just more difficult. So what I usually do is I'll take like a spreading tool and just spread them 9 frames wide. And I was just, so that I've got new comb built out on top of what had brood in it, so it's easier to uncap. And I was just wondering how you dealt with that, being that you're using all one size box, so you're not separating honey frames from brood frames. Am I right about that?
Well, there's a difference in brood comb and brood frames. Brood frames in the honey house is no good because they've got brood in them.
Okay.
Brood comb that has been backfilled with honey is not as much of an issue. If you run brood frames through an extractor, it will make your honey cloudy and degrade the quality because you've actually got brood juice and all this stuff in there. So how I would handle that, because I may still get some brood frames into the honey house, but what I'll do is I'll just put a nuke outside the door to the honey house, because I'm going to have bees in the honey house anyway, and they'll all go to the light at the door. And if you put a nuke outside the door, you can just open the door up every now and then, brush the bees out, and they'll all go to that nuke. Well, also, if you get a brood frame or 2 into the honey house on accident, when you find that, you've got a hive to go put it in right then. You can just go drop it in that nuke. Now, brood comb that has had brood in it in the past, but is now backfilled with honey, is not that much of an issue. I can uncap that with my uncapper. It will darken the color of the honey just a little bit, depending on how long the honey has been in that brood comb and how dark that brood comb is. but it's generally not an issue for me, because as frames come out of the extractor, I sort. We're in a wax moth area. You guys are not. You can store stuff outside and not have to worry about wax moth. I do. So I sort honeycomb and make full boxes of honeycomb, and then I will sort partially drawn frames and make full boxes of partially drawn frames, and then I will sort brood comb. If a frame has ever had brood in it, it goes into a brood comb box because it needs to be protected from wax moth. And then the partially drawn frames, I'll go through in the winter if they're unused and re-wax whatever is undrawn on them, so I know the bees are going to draw it out the next year.
You apply wax to the foundation?
Yeah. If plastic foundation sits in a hive, especially over winter, the bees will pick all of the wax off of it, and once the wax is off, they will never draw it out. But if you pull those partially drawn foundations and just paint a wax coating on the undrawn portions, they'll draw it out really well.
So Nathan Bromley, for our club members, I think that's really good advice on dead outs, to make sure they go through and get those corners painted, and or any frames, but also even in survivor colonies, because, you know, a lot of us, well, people overwinter different configurations. I'm also all mediums, and in the spring, when all those bees are in that top box, and, you know, you might not have this dynamic, but even in our survivor colonies, that bottom board is in bad shape. It's got a lot of dead bees on it because the undertaker bees, it's too cold for them to do their job. So we'll take it out and clean it off, and then we got that bottom box. It's a great time to get that bottom box out. Don't just do a reversal in the field, but do an assessment. And if some of those frames didn't get fully drawn, then get those waxed up. Because I've seen that same thing. You know, I know I waxed that when I put it in there last year, and there's nothing on there now.
It's shiny. It's shiny when it comes back out.
Yeah. They don't just clean the wax off, they polish the plastic.
Yep.
So
that's why they don't draw out the last. I've seen that before, and I just thought maybe a mouse had gotten on it or something, you know, but there's just no wax left on the.
Yeah, I think they pick the wax off and use it in other places.
Yeah.
And once that plastic has no coating on it, they will never ever draw it out.
So two real quick questions, because we're just about out of time. The first is, when do you stop feeding bees? Because I know you feed them heavily as they're doing the buildup. And I'm talking about the factors you see that help you to that decision.
I have fed very sparingly this spring. I had some hives that were light, especially as they started brooding, and I fed them fondant. But my honey production colonies were all made up last year or the year before. You know, they're mature colonies, and I tend to not feed mature colonies unless I know they're hungry.
Okay.
You know, I want them to build up naturally, and then I've got 25 more splits to make in April. So some of my smaller colonies that won't make grade, I'll probably stick feeders in them and stimulate them. But my ones that are big, they don't need feed. And I don't want there to be any chance of them storing sugar syrup at this point in the year. I want them to use it, you know, so I'm not going to feed heavily. If I do feed, it'll be to stimulate. I want to flash them with it, but I want them to use it up, not to store it. Pollen patties, I will use pollen patties. I went through a couple weeks ago and got a pollen patty on everybody, but that was because I was gearing up to rear queens, make splits, and we were going from, you know, highs in the 60s down to a low in the teens over the weekend. And I was afraid that the bloom was going to get killed off. And then we had a week of wet weather, and we weren't going to have much flight weather. So I didn't know if the bees were going to be able to find pollen or not. So when we get weather events like that, I'll feed pollen patties. But when I went in the next week, some of the bees had eaten almost all the pollen patty, some had eaten almost none of it, which means they didn't need it. And the ones that hadn't eaten much of it, they had hive beetle larvae in the pollen patty already. So I can't get away with feeding a lot of pollen patty where I'm at. It just creates a hive beetle problem.
Great. So let's, my last question for you. A lot of our members are new and they have foundation only. You got any advice for comb building?
A lot of sugar syrup or a heavy nectar flow and swarms. If you can catch a swarm, they will build a lot of comb for you.
They're sort of wired to do that. They're programmed.
They are. And you know that. Go ahead.
Sorry. Do you take your swarms and put them on nothing but foundation to get them to, if you can?
Yeah, I will typically give them a frame of open brood or feed them immediately when I catch them. If you do one of those two things, I've never had a swarm abscond. But if you don't do one of those two things, they can abscond on you. But if you take them and feed them, a swarm has a ton of engorged bees, and engorged bees have to make wax. It's just a natural process. If you engorge a bee of the right age, wax comes out of its belly.
Right.
It's just, it's just how it works. So when you feed those swarm bees that are already engorged, they're going to make wax. They're going to start drawing wax out immediately when they get in there. And once they are drawing wax and they've got resources, they're home. They're going to stick.
Yeah. I was asking more for like the comb building. I've never done it like this, but I've heard some people say, you catch those swarms and put them on all foundation. I've always put some brood comb in there just to keep them happy, keep them in the hive.
No, I've started a lot of swarms on nothing but foundation. I do think you need to either feed them immediately or give them a comb, especially with some open brood, and then they won't leave. They will abandon some boxes that they just don't like, and they'll move out. But if you get them to stick, then just feed them. I think 1.3 parts water to 1.1 part sugar is probably the most stimulative. There's been research done on that. I think it was in Fat Bee, Skinny Bee. Maybe it may have been in there, but 1.3 water to 1 part sugar is probably the most stimulative that you can feed for comb drawing.
All right. Any last questions from anybody that's on? I don't hear it. Nathan, this has been great. I really appreciate it. And best of luck with the season. And again, I'll make sure I put the link to your to your channel in the video. I think it's great. I really appreciate the work you're doing. All right, thank you much.